The first day I met Larry, he said to me, "What is the probability of extinction?" And I was supposed to come up with a number. And I just said, "It's highly probable." And he said 98%. Actually, 98.7%. And I said, "Okay, I can buy that." And he said, "Well, every being, life, has an extinction date. Humanity is no different. We're just expediting it." Well, the expediting part was my word. That's my thing. But we're expediting it. And for the first time, I had a conversation where someone understood it and put all of their energy into it. And this is why I'm saying this, because this is the only and most appropriate introduction I can give of such a being as Larry Kopald. When we do speak, it's not that often, but our energies connect with Andrea and Larry. Our energies connect, but we don't speak that often. But when we do, we speak about not just starting over with every conference, not starting over with every meeting, but actually making a difference and building upon what we've already done, and with actionable items. You keep hearing everyone saying actionable items, but not the actionable items that just plan another meeting, not the actionable items that just plan another conference, not the actionable items where you just speak to someone at another conference or speak to someone next door or something like that, but actionable items that literally prolong extinction. And so it's an emergency. It is at our door. It is no longer 2016 with Gore. It is no longer, we're no longer there. We are knocking on extinction, period. So for the grandchildren of the president, who he went to go spend time with them, spend all the time you can with your loved ones. And this is not a fear tactic. This is just truth. All of that said, I'm going to give you to someone who's going to probably sound worse than me, but I trust him, I admire him, and I am honored to call him friend. With that said, Larry Kopald.
The point of Angela talking about us going extinct and the likelihood is that throughout the history of the world, almost 99% of all species that ever existed have gone extinct. What makes us so special, right? So that was the point of that. Now, this is a journey, what we're about to do today. Normally, I stand up in front if I'm going to talk to a group. I talk about climate change. I talk about a solution that we are working on that really can help to not only stop climate change, but reverse climate change. And I'm not going to talk about that today. There's material over there. You can read it. All I can tell you is I would not have given up everything I was doing in my life to focus on that if I didn't believe it was the only shot we have left. Okay, so let's talk about the direness of where we are today. But I'm not going to talk about this in any way the way I have, or you've probably had this conversation going on. What I'm going to talk about today is us in this room and who we are and what we think we are and what we think we're achieving. And if you appreciated Greg's comments about all the wonderful things going on, you're going to hate my comments, okay? So, but you know what? Therein comes the conversation. So I want to start with a story. And by the way, settle in, because they asked me to speak for 40 minutes, and I don't know if I'll get there, but I'm going to talk for a while. I want to tell you about a story. About 30 years ago, I was a junior copywriter right out of college. And I was working at one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world. I was on Madison Avenue. And I was working on seminal brands like American Express and Hershey's and things like that. And I had sort of gotten a reputation pretty quickly as being an out-of-the-box strategic thinker. And one day, the agency came to me and they said, we want you to meet with Kimberly Clark, a big client of ours, probably spent $100 million with us way back then. And I said, well, I don't work on that. And they said, no, but we want you to meet. And the reason was they had a product called Huggies Diapers. They had launched Huggies Diapers, and they thought, oh my God, what an amazing product. It's more convenient. It'll make life more pleasant. Well, and they had failed. Every time they had tried to get this thing launched, it had failed. Well, interestingly enough, Procter & Gamble, another pretty darn good, marketing company, had come out with Pampers. And they had tried several times to launch this incredible breakthrough, and they had failed. So Kimberly Clark was going to kill the brand. They were going to give up, admit defeat, and okay, so we were wrong this time. They said, why don't you talk to Larry, give him a chance to think about it, whatever. Okay, great. So I said to them, do you have any research? I mean, I'm in my 20s, I have no children, I've never changed a diaper, I have no idea what you're talking about. So do you have any research? And they all started laughing. They said, yeah, we're Kimberly Clark. We make products and we make research. That's what we do. So this was before the internet. So 3 days later, a truck arrived from Neenah, Wisconsin, where they were headquartered, with about 30 huge cartons of printed out research. And I took those boxes into my office, which was about the size of this podium. I literally had to bring them a box at a time. And I spent the weekend and I read all those boxes. And inside those cartons, I found 3 little nuggets. And the nuggets by themselves didn't mean a whole lot, but when we made a bracelet out of it, we were able to change some minds. And I want to tell you what they were. Number one, even though moms understood, and back then it was moms we were talking to, but even though moms understood the convenience of this product, I don't have to keep stinky diapers in the closet, in the bin, I don't have to wash them, I don't have to do any of that stuff. They understood that these diapers were made out of plastic. And they went, what kind of mom am I? Instead of putting nice soft cotton on my baby's butt, I'm putting plastic. I'm a horrible mother for my own convenience. I can't do that. Okay, that's important fact number one. But the second thing is I'm reading through this, now I'm reading about how the product works. And I'm going, okay, so it's got this material in it that is super absorbent, more absorbent than any material's ever been, and it whisks the liquid away the minute a baby pees immediately into this material through a liner that is then always dry. So the part that touches the baby is always dry. Well, what does a baby do when they're wet? They cry because they're unhappy, because they're uncomfortable. So we came up with a campaign, never talked about convenience. We talked about making your baby happier because they're always going to be dry. And who doesn't want to make their baby happier? And I'm happy to say that a brand that was doing $600,000 in sales is doing $20 billion a year today and has done over $500 billion. Now, that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that one of my clients on Kimberly Clark, when I went through all of this, he said to me, and I have it, I'm going to read it. He said, if I go back and I say that we have spent millions and millions of dollars and years and failed because we didn't know what we were doing, we didn't understand it, even with all that research, I'm going to get fired. But damn if this guy didn't have the guts to say, you know what, we failed so far. If we don't change, we're going to continue to fail. And that guy went on to become the president of Kimberly Clark. That's what happens when you're able to admit that you failed. So today, we're at a Huggies moment. I want you to all think about that. Right now, we're at a Huggies moment. We have failed. Okay? It's really pure and simple. We have failed on the environment. We have failed on social justice. We have failed on income equality. We have failed on food and water security and peace on earth. We have failed miserably. So on that uplifting note, I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. And I want to especially thank the IONS Center. Now, I went on the website to learn about it. I hadn't been here before. I'd always passed it and wondered. And they talk a lot about truth on the website. They talk about that they're for people who are seeking the truth. They're providing a place, a forum, even a path for those who are looking for truth. So I hope that in that quest for truth, in this wonderful place dedicated to it, that our hosts are going to understand that today my talk is about lies. The lies that are told to us, the lies that we tell ourselves, the lies we tell our communities. Again, it's not the typical talk that I make, but I'm a communication strategist, so bear with me that, I don't know, maybe there's something worth thinking about. So also, the reason I'm doing this talk today is when I was asked to speak, I was said, well, who's coming? Is it the same people? And they said, well, there's actually going to be a whole lot of amazing organizations represented here today, and there are. And there's going to be leaders of organizations here today. And out of respect for what you're doing and your leadership, I want to talk about this today. So, I want to talk about uprising together. I don't think we're ready to rise up together. Okay? I don't think we're ready to change the world, and I want to talk about all that as well. My hope is that we can have a very honest talk today about the truth. I'm up here naked. I have no presentation. I have no slides. That's very unusual for me. I believe in the power of visuals, and there's amazing visuals as to what we're doing or not doing. But you know what? I want to have a fireside chat here today, and it's 130 degrees out. Why not? And I want to tell you right now that I don't have the answers to what I'm about to talk about today. The data tell us we are in unimaginable trouble with climate change. Forget about anything else, it doesn't matter. The Pentagon said about 15 years ago that by 2035, there will be 1 billion environmental refugees on Earth. 1 billion people that have had to leave their homes because there's no water or no food or both. They just doubled down and said it's going to be 2 billion people. That's in 12 years, okay? And by the way, the reason the Pentagon is involved is they said that will be the biggest national security risk we or any country has ever faced. Now, if you've heard me talk, you know that I talk a lot about the key to solving our problems, the thing that we must do to get there, we have to get back into nature. We have to stop being above it or next to it or whatever. We are as much a part of nature as the fruit fly is. I always love when people talk about we're at the top of the food chain. There is no food chain. It's an energy cycle. And if we're at the top of the food chain, how come if you leave a human being in the field, it's the microorganisms and the maggots that eat him? If we're at the top of the food, we're not. It's a cycle. And we have to start thinking of ourselves very different. And right now, we are compromising nature's ability to heal itself. That's what this is all based on. Nature heals. You know it because you're part of nature and you cut your finger and it heals, right? Right now, we've stopped nature's ability to do that. So as I read the environmental studies, and I do, I live, I breathe it, we work with, 70 countries and 200 companies right now. So we hear a lot of this, we see a lot of this, we read the tea leaves. It's really obvious that we have to stop putting ourselves first. And to me, that means addressing some very hard truths. Because how can we solve the problem if we are the problem? And if we're not honest enough to say that, if we don't know the difference between what the truth is and what a lie is, how are we going to do this? So, we talk a lot today about misinformation and disinformation and alternate facts and things like that, as though they started in 2016. They didn't start in 2016. Lying is a human art. and I want to prove that. People will accept a lie if it makes you feel better, much easier than you will accept the truth if it makes you feel bad. That's the power of a lie, and that's why they can be weaponized. In the Bible, this is for Toddy. In the Bible, God said, you must not eat from the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden. You must not even touch it, or you will die. The serpent, however, told Eve when God wasn't there, it's not true. Go ahead, you can eat the fruit. And she really wanted to eat that fruit. So she went up and she ate the fruit. She believed him. And she and Adam ate the fruit off the tree that God said, don't do that. And you know what? God was really pissed off. And God said, and I will quote God right now, cursed are you above all livestock and wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust the rest of your life. And Adam pleaded with God and said, but we were just repeating what we had been told. We were just repeating the lie. Plato, years later, Plato said, the only people who should be allowed to lie are the heads of state. Hold on. And only then if they lie for the good of the state. How quaint. Martin Luther King, there he is. Martin Luther King Jr. said, tell a very big lie and tell it often and people will believe it. Actually, that was a lie. Hitler said that. Martin Luther King said, and I quote, lying is a cooperative art. A lie has no power whatsoever by its mere utterance. Its power emerges when somebody agrees to believe that lie. So today I want to talk about how we all agree to believe the lies. I want to make sure that as leaders of organizations, we're not accepting, we're not believing, we're not spreading unintentionally things because they make us feel better. And God knows we need to feel better right now. Life is tough right now. So in the next half an hour, I want to prove to you that unfortunately we are a serious part of the problem and it's no accident. I've been a leader in business. I launched some of the biggest brands and companies on the planet. But I've also been an environmental leader. It's really, really important to me. You know, you were talking about Greenpeace earlier. I spent 10 years on the board of Greenpeace, the boards of Oceana, 1% for the Planet. I run the Carbon Underground. I'm a senior fellow at USC in the School of Business teaching social, purpose-driven entrepreneurship. This is important to me. And anyone who knows me, my friends, my family, I'm bored to death, have heard me say this sentence. My work on the planet is the biggest failure of my life. So today, here we are. This is an intimate setting with people who have the power to affect change out there. And I want to try something really different today. I want to talk about where are we? How did we get here? And how do we get out of this mess that we're in and the bigger mess we're about to give to our kids and grandkids? So let's start with where are we? So I really thought about this. What's a good way to think about where we are? And I thought about a place that we've all become known as rock bottom. I hope we're at rock bottom. Rock bottom is that place that we always say somebody's got to hit rock bottom if they're going to change their life and do something and change. My God, I hope we're at rock bottom right now. I really do. But that means we have to admit that we failed, that our choices have failed. If we do, we might get fired, like my client. I know a lot of Gen Xers. My daughter's one. I work with a bunch. They consider us utter failures. And by the way, we probably are. We probably are. They want us out of the way. And I don't, for a second, blame them. So one of the things I want us to think about is, should we be fired? And I mean that. I mean that in all seriousness. I want you to look around. This is a room of amazing people. You heard the introductions. A lot of you know each other or know of each other. There's a lot of power in this room. We're devoted. We're committed. We're working our butts off to solve the problems of the world, and we are failing. So to me, the question really isn't, have we hit rock bottom? Because as I said, I hope we have, but do we have the will? And do we still have a chance to come back up? Not sure. So now let's talk about, so how did we get here? The truth is, we've been led here. And the truth is, we have led others here. We. Here. So today I want to take the gift that you've given me of some time, some of your precious time, and who knows how much we have left. And I want to tell you so many falsehoods today. You may know they're false, you may think they're true, who knows? I don't know, we're going to find out. But hopefully by the end you're going to be a little confused by some of them. Now, again, keep in mind that lying is nothing new. Weaponizing it is what's new. How many of you support healthy forests? Everybody, of course. How many support healthy forests? How many support clean skies? Of course. You know, we wouldn't be in this room if we didn't. But I know that you all support those because you pay taxes, I assume that. And those are government agencies. Those are programs of the government. Healthy Forests is a program that we pay for that was created to allow the logging companies to cut down our forests and turn those trees into lumber so they can sell it. But they called it Healthy Forests. Clean Sky is an environmental pollution law that allows polluters to pollute more. It relaxes regulations, and you're supporting for those agencies to be able to do that stuff. By the way, if you just say to somebody, do you support the Healthy Forests program, 73% of Americans say yes. 79% of Americans say yes to the Clean Skies. We don't have a clue what they're really about, or that wouldn't be the point. So, you know, I was telling my wife I'm going to change my name to Thin Larry. Maybe you know, we'll get that too. But this is mind control. This is manipulation. This is lying with criminal effects. This is lying with deadly effects. A U.S. senator said on the floor of the Senate in hearings about trying to protect the planet, the science on science is still out. And people accepted that. There's a wonderful, terrible documentary called Merchants of Doubt. I'm guessing some of you have seen it. What it does is it talks about how people who have exploited the planet, exploited the destruction of human health, have done it by creating doubt in the minds of the public or the consumers or politicians or businesses so that nothing happens. Okay, the biggest example was tobacco. They knew tobacco was killing people. So what did? They put doctors in their advertising. And they released studies showing, no, it's not really harmful for you. These people live in cities. That's what they're dying from. They're dying from car exhaust, not cigarettes. Then they did the same thing. Same people did the same thing for climate change. And by the way, we didn't used to call it climate change. It was global warming until they said, well, you know, it was colder yesterday, so there's no such thing as global warming. But what they did is they went out and said, there's no such thing as climate change. There's a bullshit, doesn't exist. And so it stalled any legislation on it until it got so obvious that the climate is changing, they had to figure out a new tactic. So what they said is, well, yeah, but that just happens. That's a naturally occurring phenomenon. Humans aren't causing this. And then it got so apparent that humans were causing it, they said, okay, maybe we're causing it, but if we do the things they're saying we have to do to stop it, every economy in the world is going to collapse. We should probably study that for a while, right? And all the time it's getting worse and worse and worse. Today, I don't know how many of you drive an EV, I do. Shame on you. What are we going to do with that battery? How are we going to recycle all that stuff? You know, don't you realize the problems that EVs are causing? Well, you know what? They said the same thing about solar panels in the 70s. Oh my God, look at, they're taking all that steel and they're putting it on roofs and it's costing $80 a kilowatt. Well, now it's 4 cents. Cheaper than any other form of energy, and we never would have gotten there had we listened to them. This is known, it's an actual term, it's known as the stalling tactic, and that's what they want to do. But you know what else does this? This is not just something that the bad guys do. We do it. We repeat it. And I want to talk about that because we've become a big part of the problem. As I was writing this, a line just sort of appeared on the page, and any writer knows how that can happen. And the line is, "We are not simply lambs being led to slaughter. We are guilty of convincing people to get in line with us." We are increasingly unable to solve this problem if we are increasingly part of the cause of the problem. So let's jump in on that. We all know the power that we all have. We talk about it all the time. Each of us has the power of one, the individual. We can change the world. We can do all of this. The power of one. Years ago, 20 years ago, I did a short film called The Power of One. And it's been seen by, I don't know, probably close to 2 billion people in 60 languages now. And I used all the iconic pictures. I used footage of Gandhi and Mother Teresa and that wonderful man over there in the corner. And I used what has become the single most iconic piece of footage ever to show the power of one. And as soon as I say it, you're all going to go, yeah, I know that shot. Some of you are already nodding. It's a little tiny Chinese peasant. And he's standing holding 2 bags of groceries or potatoes. We don't know what's in it. But he's facing an entire line of Chinese tanks in Tiananmen Square. And he's not budging. What happens? Tanks turn around. We all know that piece. It's a great story. It's an amazing visual. And it's total bullshit. I'm going to come back to that later. So hold on to that for a second. Today, we damn people for fake news. We chastise those people with alternative facts. And how dare these? We call them cult members, right? They're MAGA cult. They're Fox News cult. They're people who run oil and gas companies, and they're so insular and so corrupt. But even more frightening is we're talking about us as well. We may not want to admit it, but you know what? We're also puppets that are dancing as the puppeteers move the screen. And you know how I know that? I know the puppeteers. I spent 3 years in politics running presidential and senatorial campaigns. This is back when Republicans and Democrats actually hung out together. And I would go out to dinner with Republican strategists, and they would say then what is still true now. They would say, you know what? You guys are so easy to predict on your side. You're going to scream and yell and protest, and then you'll go home, and we'll get what we want. Well, that was a couple decades ago. Not a whole lot has changed. They know this. So I'm going to read a bunch of facts, maybe. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about which of these are true and which of them aren't. You've heard all of them, okay? And I'm going to tell you, some are, some aren't, and see if you can tell the difference. I'm just going to read them. In a capitalistic society, economic benefits begin at the top with the wealthy and then expand downward. Okay? You know, think to yourself, true, false, whatever. How about obvious one? Eliminating fossil fuels will help stop climate change. Okay. Big Ag brought us the Green Revolution. The US military budget is dropping tremendously. And by the way, they have the numbers to prove that. But I can show you why it's not true. Increasing tax breaks for job creators will create more jobs. How about this one? You know, I work in agriculture and climate and the intersection, and the biggest thing is climate smart agriculture. That's the phrase. And you've got companies and governments committed to doing it, and plenty of environmental organizations, our partners, talk about the benefit. And so I'm just going to ask you, climate smart agriculture is a type of agriculture that's better for climate. I'll tell you the answer, it's not. It's less worse. How about this one? I know there's people here who have worked on this. Fewer people today live in poverty than any time in modern history. And by the way, bravo. Except it's not true. Do you know why they say that? Does anybody know how they get away with that? They get away because they changed the metric. So years ago, if you made under $24,000, you were living in extreme poverty. So what did they do? They said, let's lower the number to 16,000. And now, if you're making between 16 and 24, you're no longer in poverty. Kudos to us for pulling all those people out of poverty. And then a very, very, very current one, artificial intelligence. Is it going to be the end of humanity? Is it going to save humanity? I don't know. I don't know, but you know what? You know what's happening while we debate that? There's certainly no guardrails being put on, right? It's a stalling tactic. Now, some of what I just told you are outright lies. Some of them are partial lies. Some of them are completely true until you find out the truth behind them. And they're designed to generate discussion instead of generating change, because again, that stalls it. Now, for decades, we talked about, is climate change real? Scientists knew it. Of course they know. We've known this for a whole long time. But while we debated, it was unabated. And I talked about how the people who were very smart at leading us kept moving the ball down the field. They kept moving the goalposts. And today, there's a different strategy going on. And if we're not aware of it, we can't fight it, we can't stop it, we can't change it. Today, the strategy is separate humans into as many factions as possible so that they'll fight with one another. Okay, I want you to think about that for a second. I talked about how years ago Republicans and Democrats, they may have fought policy, but they got along, they hung out together. Now we hate each other. And I'm going to prove how that can be manipulated in a second. Now, it's not just the Democrats and the Republicans, and I'm only talking about the US here, but you can apply this everywhere. Now, even the Democratic Party has factions. The Republicans, oh, it's the crazy right, it's the loony left, right? And they're fighting each other. Are they going to take McCarthy down? Will the progressives support Biden, right? So now even our two parties that they've put at war have internal wars going on. Now, I told you I was going to give you a recent example. We all just went through this exercise of raising the debt ceiling. Did you all enjoy that? That was kind of fun, wasn't that? Now think about this. For 2 months, all this country heard, I don't care if you turned on Fox or CNN or MSNBC or listened to a politician, all we heard about was, well, are the Dems going to win? Are the Republicans going to win? Is Kevin McCarthy going to stand up? Is he going to get fired? Is he going to lose his job? Is Joe Biden and Yellen, will they get tarred with overseeing the collapse of the US economy because we didn't raise it? That's all we heard about. But I want to ask you a question. This was about raising the debt ceiling. Did you ever hear anybody in all of that? And we lived through it for months. It's all we talked. And by the way, I was there. I wanted my team to win. Damn right, because we were the good guys. Did anybody hear anybody talk about why do we have the debt? Anybody talk about that? We just assume we've got this debt, so we better pay it. Nobody talked about that shortfall. Nobody talked about the fact that we are mismanaging, and that's a really kind word I put in there, but we are mismanaging our money in this country, our taxpayer money, so badly that we have had to raise the debt ceiling 79 times in under 60 years. Kind of interesting. What if we demanded the truth? What if we didn't let them control the narrative that we then go out, and I had 1,000 conversations with my tribe about how we doing, we're gonna win, we're gonna this. I'm right in there. So I wanna play a game with you. Now, I was thinking about, should we call it I've Got a Secret? Or maybe Family Feud might be more appropriate. But I wanna say before I do this that I understand what I'm talking about is generalities and there's nuances and all of it. I'm doing this to make a point. I promise I'm not changing or hopefully misleading in any way whatsoever. But feel free to hit back at me later if you have pushback. But does anybody have a paper and pencil in front of them? Anybody? Okay, Catherine, can you do me a favor? I'm going to ask you to write down some numbers, okay? You've been writing everything? Oh my God. All right, first of all, how much did we just raise the debt ceiling? Anybody know? $1.5 trillion. That was on top of the $31.5 trillion that we already owe, which is insanity. Okay, $1.5 trillion that fight was over raising the debt ceiling. And what that means is putting that on our great-grandchildren's credit card because ours and our children's and our grandchildren's is already tapped out. So that's what that means. Let's be honest here. Now, what if instead of fighting each other to fund that deficit, we had eliminated it? All right, you ready to write down? The oil and gas company, big surprise, they make a lot of money. They make a lot of money. Over the past 50 years, half a century, the oil and gas industry has made pure profit, over 50 years, $2.8 billion. Not per year, per day. Per day. That's almost $1 trillion a year in pure profit for 50 years. Now, we gave that industry, you, me, taxpayers, $444 billion in subsidies last year. How come? Did they really need that? Maybe we could put that, instead of the debt ceiling column, how about the debt reduction column? They don't need it. They're not going out of business without that. So put $440 billion down there. Now, let's look at the tech industry. Tech industry they don't make money, they make billionaires. They make so much money, right? We all know that. They make millionaires and billionaires. And yet we gave them $60 billion in subsidies. And you know what they did with that money? They bought bigger yachts and bigger airplanes. They didn't need that. Probably didn't hear anybody mention that in all these conversations. J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs received $100 million in subsidies, and the other banks combined and the hedge funds got $300 billion in subsidies. So put 400 more on that, if you would, please. Big Pharma got $45 billion. Doesn't sound like a whole lot anymore, does it? We know they don't need money. They made $200 billion in profits before COVID. And I'll talk about the COVID subsidy in a second. Big Ag and Big Food made $750 billion, but they got $230 billion in subsidies from us. Pardon me? 230. You can see where I'm going with this. Healthcare got $1 trillion in subsidies for COVID. $1 trillion. Now, if we use just the period that we're talking about the debt ceiling, it's about $250 billion. So add $250 billion in subsidies to an industry that was paying its CEOs 10, 20, 30 million a year before COVID hit. They didn't need this money. And by the way, I want to add one more thing. The new money we put under our debt, the 1.5 trillion, at 7% interest, comes out to $110 billion a year in interest payments. That's just that. Forget about the 30 trillion. That's just that. So add 110. So I'm sort of roughly added this up. Do you have a number there? All right, I'm going to. Okay, you know what? You can check what I'm going to say, but I'm going to jump in and say that adds up to $1,685 billion that we gave to rich people that didn't need a penny of it. You didn't hear any of this, did you? Nobody talked about any of this. Not the mainstream media, not a single politician. Maybe Elizabeth Warren got something in there, but so what if we didn't raise the debt ceiling? What if we lowered the debt and took all that money back, stopped giving subsidies to these insanely rich organizations that in many cases are causing the problems we're trying to solve? What if we took that $1.6 trillion for this year and put it into helping those problems? Yeah, but you know, who's going to win? America would win. The planet would win. Right? So let's keep that. We never heard a single mention of any of that, which is lying by omission. But we also get outright lies that help perpetuate the deficit lie. Like, we have the best healthcare system in the world. Anybody ever hear that? 3,000 times? We don't have the best healthcare. By any metric, we don't have the best healthcare system in the world. And by the way, maybe if you're extremely wealthy, yeah, we have some of the best practitioners in the world. Some of them. There's great ones in many places. But we don't have the best healthcare system. How about this lie that perpetuates subsidies? The reason Big Pharma needs subsidies and the reason that pill costs $50 or in many cases $800 is because they have to get back the R&D money they spent developing the drug. Okay. You know who paid that R&D budget? You did. Because today it's the universities that we fund that are doing the R&D for all of these companies. And if you don't believe it, ask yourselves, well, if that's really the cause and they have to recoup their investment, why do they sell the same pill in Europe for $3 that they sell for $83 here? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you know, hearing these things makes us feel better. Having the best healthcare system helps us feel better. Knowing that Big Pharma is developing these wonderful products makes us feel better. But now I want to bring it much closer to home, and I want to talk about what people in this room are working on and why. Was it Lynn who had the cup with the SDGs on it? The different colors for the UN. There you go. That cup right there. So a lot of us, I want to talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. I mean, my gosh, who wouldn't want to dream to have all of those problems fixed? 17 different things that we have to do simultaneously if we're going to restore and rebuild our world. So we better get to work doing it. I'm glad some of you are working on this. But let's for 1 second say, it's not a world we're looking at restoring, it's a building. It's a big building, dilapidated, it's got all kinds of problems, and I'm going to apply some of the same SDG goals to fixing up that building. So some of the people would work on bringing renewable power to the building. Really great goal, terrific. Some of the people would work on bringing wiring and internet into the building so that everybody could access that power and everybody could access the internet and all the information or opportunities that come with it. Some of those people are going to have to go into HR so that the DEI requirements are being satisfied. Others are going to have to look into the salary levels of people who are working in or on that building and making sure that there's equity in that. Some of the people are going to have to work on making sure there's a cafeteria in there that's big enough to feed everybody and make sure they're feeding them healthy food, because that's one of the SDG goals. A couple more are going to work on community relationships, right? Because we want to promote peace on this planet, right? So that's another SDG goal. And then some of the people are going to work in job training to make sure that the people there can constantly improve their life, constantly have new opportunities and increase their income. And some of them are going to work on things like water and making sure there's water coming into the building. Okay, so those are about half the SDGs that I just mentioned that have to happen simultaneously to fix that building. Right now they're saying they all have to happen to fix this planet. Now I'm going to add one more thing, and it's related to an SDG. So imagine that building that we're working on, that all this effort, all this money is going into, is currently on fire. Every room is on fire. Would we really be approaching it the same way? Every room is on fire. The wiring we're putting in is melting. The water coming into the building is evaporating. The cafeteria, all that food's been burned to a crisp. And by the way, all of those emissions are poisoning that community nearby that we're supposed to be committed to protecting. But hey, we're only human. So we had a questionnaire attached to the sign-in here today. And I was using some of, without projecting it, but I wanted to get some feedback on the SDGs and which things were most important to you. And I knew by doing it that you would make my point for me, and I want to thank you all for being complicit in this. Because somehow, even though the planet is burning, it's 130 degrees 3 hours from here. 130. Phoenix has been over 110 for 28 straight days. The planet is burning up. But yet, we give each one of those SDGs the same voice as though they're all equal. I thought it was astonishing to me that we asked the question, there were 4 choices, where do you think we'll be living in 100 years? Remember the choices there? Here's the astonishing, I was blown away by this. So thank you for failing miserably to make my point. 84% of you said we will be living on a healthier, more equitable planet. 84% of you, I want what you're smoking. Because science tells us that's impossible. Even if we pull out of this, even if we're able to deal with climate change, and we may not have another chance, we may not have the time, but even if we do, the next century, it's going to get worse and worse and worse because of what's baked in already. Because of the trillion tons of CO2 that we've moved from inside the ground into the atmosphere that take 50 years to start doing damage after they're emitted. Which means the climate change that we're all in the middle of today is from emissions that our grandparents put in. Our stuff hasn't even started to cause a problem yet. So I'm going to disappoint a lot of you and say, unless there's some miracles out there, and always praying for those, 100 years from now, we're not going to be living in a super healthy, super equitable planet. We may be living on a planet that's getting better. Well, we may not be living, but let's be optimistic here and say that in 100 years, we are going to realize that we did have the power to turn it around, and we're starting to see evidence of that. But I promise you, there's still going to be environmental refugees in every corner. So, what if the United Nations, and by that I mean us, what if we prioritize those goals instead of politicize those goals? What if we actually were the United Nations of the world? Right now, the 17 SDGs mean, by design, by definition, 17 factions. 17 factions competing for limited dollars, political support, attention, volunteers, whatever it is. So was this division intentional? I don't know. Or I'm seeing some people nod yes. But you know what, maybe not. Maybe this was really good, wonderfully intentioned people whose design was simply corrupted because it was so easy to corrupt. But the big question is, does it matter? Does it matter how we got here anymore? What matters is that, like Huggies, we're failing. And I want to use some of the SDGs specifically as proof. Well, how good does it feel to hear that fewer people are living in extreme poverty than any time in human history? How good? That feels pretty damn good, right? Except that we didn't reduce poverty. We simply changed the metrics, as I talked about. How about climate change? My issue, right? How about climate change? Well, when the UN is not promoting its SDGs, when we're not promoting its SDGs, it's promoting the United Nations Conference on Parties, the COPs that Greg talked about earlier today. Now, this is we've had 27 of them. I spoke at the last 4. I don't know that I'll ever go back. And here's why. How are we doing on that? 27 years ago, the United Nations said, we're going to kill the planet's ability to support us if we don't stop global warming, as it was called then. And in order to do that, we have to stop emissions from our reliance on the burning of fossil fuels. So we've had 27 years of COPs which bring together all the countries of the world and the biggest companies of the world. And this is the one thing they come together to work on: reducing emissions. So in 27 years, we've probably made some pretty good progress. So at COP1, the current or the average CO2 emissions that year was 24 billion tons of CO2 were added to the atmosphere. Okay, remember that, 24 billion. Today, after 27 years of working on it, we have reduced that number to, wait, this can't be right, 37 billion tons. You get that? We're up more than 50% in the thing that they admitted is going to kill us if we don't reduce it, but we're up more than 50%. This year, the focus of COP28 is going to be net zero. We all hear we have to achieve net zero. I'm sure you guys know about carbon neutrality and achieving net zero, which means when you combine the emissions that we're emitting today with carbon that we're taking out of the atmosphere, there are no new net emissions going into the atmosphere. And as I said earlier, we're going to die from the legacy emissions that are already up there, the trillion tons that are already up there. And maybe you've heard me use this analogy, but right now we're at 420 parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere. We should be at 280. Now I want you to think about a 420-pound man walking into his doctor's office for a physical. Now this 420 pounds, he's got heart disease, diabetes, he's already had his leg amputated because of that, and his doctor gives him a bunch of tests and says, you know what we got to do? We have to slow down the rate at which you're gaining weight. That's what a strategy of reducing emissions does. And yet we all talk about how excited we are about reducing emissions, about net zero. In fact, when we hear, and we hear it all the time, you're going to recognize this immediately, that this company or this company or this country or this country has committed to reducing their carbon footprint 25% by 2030 or 50% by 2040. And what do? We applaud them. That's fantastic. Wow, that's really great. Okay, but let me ask you a question. What if instead of putting poison in the sky, they were putting poison in Santa Monica Bay? They were pouring DDT and pesticides and lead and all that stuff. And we said to them, you can't do that. You're killing the bay, and that hurts everybody. And they said, you're right, you're right. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the amount of poison that we're dumping in there by 20% in 20 years. Mm-hmm. That's insane. And yet, somehow, when it comes to climate, we've let them get away with it. Now, I want to go back to the COPs for a second. COP 28. Now, remember how we got into this problem. It's burning fossil fuels. It's the single biggest cause. COP 28 is being hosted by the United Arab Emirates, an oil country. It is being hosted, the guy who will lead it is Sultan Al-Jaber, who is not only the head of that, he's the head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Huh, that sounds kind of foreboding. But here's something else. Last year at COP27, there were 636 oil and gas lobbyists inside the tent that we weren't allowed in. 25% more than the year before. It's projected that this year there will be over 1,000 oil company lobbyists in that tent, and we don't know what's being said. Now, just to help you understand how crazy this is, you probably don't know that tobacco company lobbyists are not allowed in healthcare conferences. That arms dealers, the lobbyists for that, are not allowed in conferences about global peace. And somehow, the conference that exists to reduce dependence on fossil fuel is being run behind closed doors by fossil fuel companies. And yet what we do, we will celebrate that COP is going on. You're going to hear it, the lead up, you're going to have all the million people that are going, and by the way, there will be 1 million individuals there, like there were the last year and the year before. They'll be on the street. And there'll be a lot of protesting on the street. Okay, great. So 1 million people in the street, uprising together? Maybe. It sounds great, it feels great, but we need to make sure that it works great. I'll give you an example. When Trump was elected, we all came together in the United States, but around the world, and said, you know what, we got to protect women's rights. We know what this one's about. And so we had protests all over the world. I was downtown holding up my signs, and you know what? It felt really good. And what did the news report? That, oh my God, look at all these protests to support women's rights all over the country, all over the world. And since then, women have lost more rights than at any time in history. Okay? So again, we got to understand what we're doing. You know, women controlling their body, nope, they lost that right. Getting an abortion, they lost that right. How about a woman having the right to file for a divorce if she's pregnant? Well, if you live in Missouri, you lost that right. Okay, so But we had a lot of people. Made us feel good. The last 2 weeks, the people of Israel have been in the streets, right? Trying to stop Netanyahu from destroying the Supreme Court and the legal system there. And you know what? We all saw the demonstrations. You know what happened? Nothing. He got away with it. He did it. And he was so successful at doing it that he's now talking about going the next step, a more draconian step. So we do need to rise up. And we do need to do it together. But we need to do it smarter. So I want to end with a couple of thoughts. Number one, instead of being mired in the process, we need to be focused on the outcome. If getting 1 million people to rally is the outcome you want, okay, you succeeded. But if protecting women's rights was the outcome you wanted, we have failed. We have to demand honesty. We have to demand honesty from corporations and governments and the people we see in the mirror every morning. We have to do that. Because, and I apologize, Greg, you talked about all those wonderful things and organizations and you know, the G40 and this and all this amazing new technology. And I've started companies now with technology to help fight climate change. We're up 50% in emissions since we started fighting. There is not a single metric of the health of the planet that has improved. Not a single one. So we have to stop celebrating the things that, the efforts that people are making, and we have to start focusing on the impact that we're having. This is really, really, really critical. I mean, if I asked you how you think about the Sustainable Development Goals now, I'm hoping you have just maybe a little different lens that you're going to look at it. Or when you start hearing about, hey, COP's coming around, we're really going to focus on this again, maybe you'll go, well, let's talk about that. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. And by the way, anybody thinking about what we might do here, I know that I am. Another thing we have to do is we have to stop being manipulated into tribes. So that we're going to focus more on beating the other one or getting a bigger share of the budget or more publicity or more votes than the other guy. We have to stop letting them do that. You all know what I'm about to say, which is on every major issue in the United States. Abortion, gun control, climate change, all of this. It's north of 80% agreement from the public to stop the problem, okay? But nothing happens because we fight each other all the time. We also have to understand that consequences go both ways, and we have to let them know that. Them being the people in power who are the puppeteers, if you will. You know, I work a lot in Costa Rica, and we work on restoring land and doing research and proving how it draws carbon back down. You know what they do in Costa Rica when they're pissed off at their government? They shut down the highways by dragging trees into the middle of it, or lighting tires, and the whole country freezes. And you know what the government says is, holy shit, we better pay attention to them, or they're going to keep doing this. What if we did that all over the world? What if we did that all over the world? What if we laid down on every major highway around the world and we said, we're not getting up until these 6 things are agreed to and the money's in escrow. So never forget that consequences can work both ways. And I'm not talking about violence. We don't need to resort to that. Another thing I want us to consider is the idea to merge and merge and merge even more. Rather than being divided and finding our tribe, we need to have fewer tribes. We need to come together so that we're united, so they can't divide us and beat us. Do we need 5,000 environmental organizations in California? How about 5 with the clout and the funding of an 8 million pound gorilla? That'll work. That'll work. You know, I told you I was on the board of Greenpeace for 10 years. I'm still involved in a lawsuit. And Greenpeace was sued, and board members can be named in lawsuits, as you probably know now. And The lawyer handling the case, and I won't get into what the case is, it's absurd and they're losing, but it's not done yet. But the lawyers, by the way, are the same lawyers that Trump used for many, many years. And like we've learned with some of his other lawyers, sometimes they say things publicly they probably shouldn't have. So this guy was interviewed about the lawsuit in the Wall Street Journal. And what he said was, our goal is not to win the lawsuit. Our goal is to destroy Greenpeace's ability to exist because they're the only 800-pound gorilla in the environmental movement, and if we get rid of them, we can do anything we damn please. And the Wall Street Journal ran that quote. And then the other last thing I want to say is that we have to accept, we have to demand the fact that with all the things that we know are important for us to work on, all of the things we're trying to achieve, the SDGs, the things we're all working on, we need to focus on climate change. We do. The house is on fire. If we don't fix climate change, do you think anybody with 2 billion refugees is really going to care about income equality or curing cancer or any of the things we're talking about? So we have to do that. And never forget that being an insurmountable voice is not important if you're not also an insurmountable power. I told you earlier I was going to come back to the power of one. Boy, we got some wonderful spiritual leaders in this room. I know how important it is to feel the sense of our power inside. I promised I would talk about Tiananmen Square because that is the single most iconic visual of the power of one that we know of, that gets used all the time. So I'd like to ask everybody in the room for a second to close your eyes, okay? And mine are open, so I'm checking. So close your eyes and think of that iconic shot. The black and white video. You've got the peasant farmer on the left all by himself, hands down at his side, holding onto bags of groceries or potatoes or whatever. And he's staring at a column of tanks that is so long it goes out of the frame. And we're sitting there and we're watching him. And what happens? He doesn't budge, but the tanks turn around, okay? So we all know this. Now I want you to keep your eyes closed, and I'm going to tell you a part of the picture they don't show you, because it's really, really powerful. Imagine you're there and you're looking at this scene, and you see the column of tanks and the guy all by himself. Now I want you to walk over to where that first tank is. And I want you to stand next to that tank and turn around and look at the guy. You know what he sees? He doesn't see an individual standing up to the tanks. He sees a man who happens to be out in front of 1 million people who are in that street to stop those tanks. 1 million people saying, we are not standing down. And what happened? The tanks turned around. Now, that's not the power of one. That's the power of 1 million. So imagine the power of 1 billion. Imagine what would happen then. If we could come together, if we could rise up, but together has to have a strategy. It has to have a unity. That's where the power is going to come from if we're going to fix this. And that, all of you, is the honest truth. Thank you. And now, if you have any questions or you just want me to leave, happy to do so. But, sure.